Sometimes the greatest miracle does not arrive with sunshine. Sometimes it knocks during the darkest storm, asking only for one chance to be believed. The rain had been falling for hours across the mountains of western Montana, drumming relentlessly against the weathered roof of Nathan Brooks's small log cabin. Fierce winds bent the towering pine trees until they seemed ready to surrender to the night, while distant thunder rolled across the valleys like an endless echo. Inside the warm cabin, however, everything remained wonderfully ordinary. A kettle whistled softly on the old cast-iron stove. Firelight flickered across handcrafted wooden shelves lined with family photographs and well-worn books. 8-year-old Emma Brooks sat cross-legged on a braided rug, carefully coloring a picture of a red cardinal, while her father secured another log onto the fire. Nathan had learned years ago that storms could damage buildings, but they never had to disturb the peace inside a home. He glanced toward the window as another powerful gust rattled the glass. "Looks like this one plans to stay a while," he said with a quiet smile. Emma looked up without fear. "The cabin always wins." Nathan laughed softly. "Only because we take care of it." He pulled an old wool blanket over the back of the rocking chair before checking every latch on the windows one final time. Life had taught him to prepare for difficult nights instead of worrying about them. Ever since losing his wife several years earlier, every decision centered on one simple promise. Emma would always feel safe. Money remained scarce. The pickup truck outside had traveled well beyond 200,000 miles, and every improvement to the cabin came from Nathan's own hands after long days repairing fences, porches, and barns across neighboring ranches. Yet gratitude had somehow found room inside every corner of their modest home. Emma suddenly stopped coloring. She tilted her head toward the front door. "Did you hear that?" Nathan listened carefully. At first, there was only rain striking the porch roof. Then came 3 slow knocks. Not hurried, not desperate, just steady enough to make the room fall completely. Silent. Nathan exchanged a quick glance with Emma before walking toward the entrance. Few people traveled these mountain roads after dark, especially during weather like this. He opened the wooden door only a few inches before the freezing wind rushed inside, carrying sheets of rain across the floor. Standing beneath the dim porch light was a woman in her mid-30s wearing an elegant navy business coat, soaked completely through by the storm. Strands of blonde hair clung to her face, and tiny drops of water rolled from her sleeves as she struggled to steady her breathing. Despite the difficult conditions, she carried herself with remarkable composure, her blue eyes reflecting exhaustion without surrender. Nathan noticed there was no fear in her expression, only urgency. "I'm sorry to disturb you," she said politely. "I know how this must look." Nathan opened the door wider without hesitation. "You should come inside before you freeze." She remained on the porch for another second. "If I do not reach someone before sunrise," she said quietly, "I will lose the most important thing my grandfather ever left behind." Nathan studied her face, searching not for answers, but for honesty. He found it immediately, without asking her name, where she came from, or why she had driven alone through a mountain storm. He stepped aside. "Then tonight," he replied gently, "the storm can wait outside." Emma hurried toward the hallway, carrying the old blue towel she always offered unexpected visitors. The woman accepted it with grateful hands before finally crossing the threshold into the warmth of the cabin. As Nathan closed the heavy wooden door against the roaring wind, none of them realized that the simple act of opening one ordinary door would quietly begin changing lives far beyond the lonely mountains where the storm had first found them. Victoria Hayes wrapped the warm towel around her shoulders while Nathan quietly poured a steaming cup of coffee into a sturdy ceramic mug and placed it on the kitchen table beside a second cup of hot chocolate for Emma. The little cabin felt even warmer after the heavy wooden door shut out the wind, leaving only the steady crackling of the fire and the gentle tapping of rain against the windows. Victoria looked around the room, taking in the handmade furniture, framed family photographs, and shelves filled with carefully repaired books. Nothing inside the cabin suggested wealth, yet everything reflected patience, care, and quiet pride. Emma smiled politely before placing a plate of freshly baked oatmeal cookies on the table. People always feel better after something warm, she said. Victoria could not help returning the smile. Thank you. Nathan pulled out a chair. Please sit down. You can tell us what brought you here whenever you are ready. Victoria carefully removed a leather envelope from inside her soaked business coat. Although the coat was drenched, the envelope had been protected beneath a waterproof lining. She held it with both hands for several seconds before speaking. My grandfather passed away 3 months ago, she began softly. He founded Hayes Industries almost 60 years ago. Before he died, he left several sealed letters for me, but one of them was different. Nathan listened quietly without interrupting. Victoria opened the envelope and unfolded a thick sheet of cream-colored paper written in elegant handwriting. Every letter contained instructions, she continued. This one included only one name. She slowly turned the page so Nathan could read it for himself. Written clearly in dark blue ink were 2 simple words. Nathan Brooks. Nathan looked surprised but shook his head. I have never met your grandfather. That is exactly what I believed, Victoria replied. The letter instructed me to find you personally. It warned me not to send anyone else and not to explain the reason until I reached your home. Emma leaned forward with innocent curiosity. What happens after you find my dad? Victoria unfolded a second page hidden beneath the first. It says we must travel together before sunrise to an old stone bridge deep inside Black Pine Forest. Nathan immediately recognized the location. The abandoned bridge had not been used for decades after a newer highway bypassed the valley. Few people even remembered it still existed. Victoria continued reading aloud. Beneath the center foundation lies something that belongs to neither wealth nor power. Only Nathan Brooks should open it. The cabin became completely silent. Nathan looked toward the flames dancing inside the fireplace, trying to remember whether he had ever crossed paths with the founder of Hayes Industries. Nothing came to mind. He had spent nearly all his life in Montana, working with his hands and raising Emma after tragedy reshaped his world. Victoria carefully folded the letter again. I searched for weeks before finally finding your address. The storm nearly forced me to turn back twice. Nathan nodded thoughtfully. The bridge is about 30 miles from here. If the roads are passable, we can reach it after first light. Victoria lowered her eyes. The letter specifically says before sunrise. Nathan glanced toward the old grandfather clock standing quietly beside the fireplace. Less than 4 hours remained until dawn. Emma suddenly looked at the folded letter with unusual interest. My grandma used to say something like that, she whispered. Nathan smiled gently. What do you remember? Emma thought for a moment before repeating the words exactly as they came to her. The right treasure never waits for the richest hands. It waits for the kindest heart. Victoria's eyes widened instantly. Her breathing caught for just a moment as she stared at the little girl. Slowly, almost trembling, she opened the letter again and turned it over. Written across the bottom margin in her grandfather's familiar handwriting was the exact same sentence. Nathan quietly noticed the astonishment on Victoria's face. Outside, the storm continued to rage through the mountains, but inside the small cabin, it no longer felt as though chance had brought them together. It felt as though someone, long before the rain had ever begun, had already written the first page of a story neither of them yet understood. Nathan looked through the frost-covered window toward the dark outline of the mountains as the old grandfather clock quietly marked another passing minute. Dawn was still hidden beyond the horizon, but time was slipping away faster than the storm itself. He folded the letter carefully and handed it back to Victoria before reaching for his worn canvas jacket hanging beside the door. If we leave now, we might have enough time, he said calmly. Victoria stood without hesitation. I have already come too far to stop now. Emma hurried toward the hallway, carrying Nathan's flashlight and an extra pair of heavy gloves. You always forget these, she said with a cheerful grin. Nathan laughed softly. That is why I keep you around. Victoria watched the simple exchange with quiet admiration. She had attended board meetings worth billions of dollars, negotiated international contracts, and spoken before thousands of shareholders. Yet she suddenly realized she had never witnessed a father and daughter communicating with such effortless trust. Nathan turned toward Emma and knelt beside her. "Stay with Mrs. Dawson next door until I get back. I shall not be gone long." Emma nodded without complaint, because she had learned long ago that her father never made promises he could not keep. Within minutes, the old pickup truck rolled slowly onto the rain-soaked gravel road. The windshield wipers struggled against the steady rain, while the headlights carved narrow paths through the lingering darkness. Victoria glanced around the aging truck. The dashboard carried scratches earned through years of honest work, and a faded photograph of Emma smiled from the corner beside the speedometer. Nathan drove with quiet confidence, both hands steady on the wheel as the mountain road twisted between towering pines. For nearly 10 minutes, neither of them spoke. The silence did not feel uncomfortable. It felt respectful. Finally, Victoria broke it. "You have not asked me a single question." Nathan kept his eyes on the road. "You came here because your grandfather trusted me. I figured whatever I need to know will reveal itself when it is time." Victoria looked at him with genuine surprise. "Most people recognize my last name before I finish introducing myself." Nathan smiled faintly. "Names can open doors. Character tells you what is waiting on the other side." Victoria lowered her eyes toward the folded letter resting in her lap. During the past several weeks, she had encountered investigators, lawyers, executives, and consultants. Every one of them wanted to know what the letter contained because they believed it might lead to money or influence. Nathan had not asked whether Hayes Industries was involved, had not asked about inheritance, and had not once mentioned compensation. His only concern had been whether they could reach the bridge before sunrise. As the truck climbed higher into the forest, the rain gradually softened into a cold mist drifting between the trees. The first faint traces of morning began coloring the eastern sky with pale gray light. Nathan slowed as they approached an abandoned logging road almost hidden beneath years of fallen needles and moss. "The bridge is less than half a mile ahead," he said. Suddenly, he eased off the accelerator completely. Victoria followed his gaze toward the muddy trail illuminated by the headlights. Fresh tire tracks cut sharply through the wet earth, their edges still crisp despite the rain. Nathan quietly stepped out of the truck and crouched beside them. He brushed away a small layer of water with his gloved hand before studying the marks. When he stood again, his expression remained calm, but his voice grew more thoughtful. "Someone else drove through here not very long ago." Victoria felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. She looked toward the silent forest where the ancient stone bridge waited beyond the trees. According to her grandfather's letter, no one except Nathan was supposed to know about this place. Yet the untouched wilderness was now telling a very different story. The old stone bridge emerged from the morning mist like a forgotten memory, resting quietly between towering pine trees and a narrow creek that still rushed with rainwater from the night storm. Moss covered much of the weathered stone, while vines clung to the sides as though nature itself had been protecting the place for generations. Nathan parked the pickup beside the abandoned trail and stepped into the cool morning air. The rain had almost stopped, leaving only droplets falling from the branches overhead. Victoria stood beside him, clutching her grandfather's letter. With steady hands, neither of them spoke for several moments. The silence carried an unusual weight, as though the bridge had been waiting patiently through countless seasons for this exact sunrise. Nathan walked slowly across the uneven stones, carefully studying the structure exactly as he would inspect an old barn before beginning repairs. He stopped near the center and looked over the edge toward the creek below. "The foundation should be underneath this section," he said quietly. Victoria unfolded the letter once more and confirmed the simple directions written in her grandfather's elegant handwriting. "Beneath the center foundation, only Nathan Brooks should open what waits there." Nathan climbed down a narrow path beside the bridge until he reached the stone support rising from the flowing water. Years of erosion had exposed several large rocks at its base. He ran his hand across the cold surface before noticing something unusual. One stone felt smoother than the others. Pressing firmly against it, he heard a soft click hidden beneath the sound of the creak. A narrow section of stone slowly shifted inward, revealing a small compartment that had remained perfectly concealed for decades. Victoria held her breath as Nathan carefully reached inside. Resting within the hidden space sat a weathered steel box no larger than a toolbox, its surface marked by age but remarkably free from rust. He lifted it carefully onto the flat stones beside the creek. The box was surprisingly heavy. There was no lock, only a brass latch polished by time. Nathan looked toward Victoria. "Your grandfather wanted me to open it." She nodded silently. He released the latch. The lid rose with a gentle creak, revealing not stacks of cash or priceless jewels, but several carefully preserved items arranged with remarkable care. On top rested a thick leather-bound journal wrapped in protective cloth. Beneath it lay a sealed wooden case containing what appeared to be the original charter of Hayes Industries. Beside the documents rested several individually addressed envelopes, tied neatly with blue ribbon and a small metal storage drive, enclosed inside a waterproof case. Victoria stared silently at the contents. Her grandfather had spent his entire life building one of America's most successful companies, yet the treasure he had hidden beneath an abandoned bridge consisted almost entirely of words, promises, and memories. Nathan gently lifted the journal and noticed a folded sheet of fresh white paper resting underneath it. Unlike everything else inside the box, this page looked newly placed. The edges remained crisp, untouched by moisture or time. He unfolded it slowly. Written across the center in dark blue ink was a single sentence. "At last, you brought the right person here." Victoria's heartbeat quickened. That paper was not mentioned anywhere in the letter. Nathan turned it over, searching for another message, but both sides remained otherwise blank. As he lowered the page, something caught his attention on the steel lid itself. A faint handprint, still visible in the thin layer of morning condensation, stretched across the metal surface as though someone had touched it only moments earlier. Nathan quietly studied it without alarm. The rain during the night should have erased every recent trace, yet this print remained unmistakably fresh. Victoria slowly looked around the peaceful forest where only birds had begun greeting the new day. No voices echoed through the trees. No footsteps disturbed the damp earth. Everything appeared completely still. Yet both of them understood the same unsettling truth without saying a word. Someone else had reached the hidden box before they did, had left behind a message meant only for them, and had disappeared so quietly that the forest itself seemed determined to keep the secret. For several long moments, neither Nathan nor Victoria reached for another item inside the steel box. The fresh note and the mysterious handprint lingered quietly in their minds, but the journal resting between them seemed to ask for their attention first. Nathan carefully brushed away a few drops of moisture before opening the worn leather cover. The first page carried a simple handwritten title, "The Measure of a Good Guardian." Beneath it appeared the familiar signature of Victoria's grandfather, William Hayes. Victoria slowly sat on one of the broad stones beside the creek, her eyes never leaving the pages as Nathan began reading aloud. The early entries described the founding of Hayes Industries, not through financial success or market victories, but through promises made to employees, customers, and neighbors. William wrote that a company could survive difficult years if it protected trust before profit. Every sentence reflected humility rather than pride. Nathan quietly nodded. "He sounds more like a teacher than a businessman." Victoria smiled softly. "I never heard him speak this way in public." As they continued turning the pages, the journal shifted from business history to something far more personal. William described how success had slowly surrounded him with people who admired influence more than integrity. He admitted that wealth often attracted impressive resumes, but rarely revealed genuine character. Because of that realization, he had spent years searching for someone who still lived by quiet principles instead of public recognition. Nathan looked puzzled. Surely he knew many honorable people. Victoria remained silent as Nathan continued reading. One page stopped him completely. Year after year, I observed a man who never knew I was watching. He repaired roofs for elderly neighbors who could not afford the work. He rebuilt fences after storms and quietly refused payment when families struggled. He delivered groceries without leaving his name. He attended funerals of veterans he had never met because no one else came. The world measures success by applause. I have learned to measure it by what a person chooses when no one is looking. Nathan lowered the journal, visibly uncomfortable. I never did any of those things expecting someone to notice. Victoria looked at him with growing understanding. That is exactly why my grandfather noticed. Nathan turned another page. Several photographs had been carefully tucked between the journal leaves. They showed community events, church picnics, volunteer repair projects, and holiday food drives spread across nearly 15 years. Nathan appeared somewhere in each photograph, always in the background, carrying lumber, fixing equipment, serving meals, or helping someone else while completely unaware a camera had captured the moment. There are no close-up portraits, no staged meetings, only ordinary acts woven quietly through ordinary days. Victoria gently touched one of the photographs. He followed your life for all these years. Nathan remained speechless. The realization felt almost impossible to understand. William Hayes had possessed every resource imaginable, yet he had chosen to spend precious time studying an unknown carpenter living in rural Montana. Nathan carefully opened another folded page near the center of the journal. A handwritten message stood alone across the paper. If these words are being read, then my granddaughter trusted the right man enough to bring him here. Wealth can build buildings. Character builds futures. Nathan Brooks has already proven which one lasts longer. Victoria felt tears gathering but smiled through them. Her grandfather had never intended this hidden legacy to identify the most powerful successor. He had intended it to reveal the most trustworthy witness. Nathan slowly closed the journal with both hands, treating it with the same care he would give an old family Bible. Around them, the first golden light of sunrise filtered through the pine trees, warming the ancient stones of the forgotten bridge. In that quiet moment, both of them understood that the greatest inheritance hidden beneath the bridge had never been the charter or the documents. It was the extraordinary discovery that one man's unseen kindness had been patiently changing another man's plans for many years without either of them ever meeting face to face. The morning sun slowly climbed above the pine-covered ridges as Nathan carefully packed every item from the steel box into a canvas tool bag, making certain the journal, the original charter, the sealed letters, and the small metal storage drive remained dry. Neither of them mentioned the mysterious note or the fresh handprint again, yet both silently carried those unanswered questions as they walked back toward the old pickup. The forest no longer felt threatening. Instead, it felt watchful, as though someone had trusted the mountains to guard a promise until the proper moment arrived. During the drive back, Victoria turned the metal storage drive over in her hands several times. "Do you think this still works after all these years?" she asked. Nathan glanced at it briefly before returning his attention to the winding road. "Your grandfather protected everything else carefully. I doubt he overlooked this." Nearly an hour later, they returned to Nathan's cabin. Emma was already waiting on the porch beside Mrs. Dawson, who smiled warmly before heading home after making certain everything was all right. Emma immediately noticed the worn journal inside Nathan's bag. "Did you find the treasure?" she asked excitedly. Nathan smiled. "We found something much more valuable." After breakfast, Nathan carried his old laptop onto the kitchen table. It was several years old, but he had maintained it carefully, repairing it whenever necessary instead of replacing it. Victoria connected the storage drive, while Emma watched with quiet curiosity. For a brief moment, nothing happened. Then a single folder appeared on the screen, labeled simply, "For the day truth is needed." Victoria clicked it open. Inside were dozens of video recordings, each dated across nearly 20 years. The earliest recording appeared first. William Hayes sat alone inside what looked like his private office. His hair was darker than Victoria remembered, and his voice carried the calm confidence of a man who had already accepted the passage of time. "If you are watching this," he began, then events have unfolded exactly as I hoped they would. Documents alone can preserve facts, but only a voice can preserve conviction. Nathan and Victoria listened without interruption. William explained that the original charter represented far more than legal authority. It contained the founding principles that every future leader had promised to honor before accepting responsibility for the company. Those principles required long-term stewardship, protection of employees, honest partnerships, and decisions guided by integrity instead of short-term gain. William spoke openly about his growing concern that future leadership might eventually treat the charter as an old ceremonial document instead of a binding commitment. A company does not lose its soul in one dramatic moment, he said gently. It loses it through hundreds of small compromises that gradually become normal. Victoria lowered her eyes. She had recently faced increasing pressure from several influential board members who argued that aggressive restructuring would produce greater profits, even if thousands of loyal employees paid the price. William continued speaking directly into the camera. If the day ever comes when these principles are questioned, do not ask who has the highest title. Ask who has consistently protected the dignity of others without expecting recognition. That person will understand this charter better than many executives ever will. Nathan looked quietly toward Victoria, uncertain why William continued referring to him with such confidence. Before either of them could say another word, Victoria's cell phone vibrated across the wooden table. The screen displayed an unknown number. She opened the message slowly. There were only 12 words. Bring the original charter to the board meeting this morning. Do not come alone. Nathan and Victoria exchanged a long, silent glance. The message contained no signature, no explanation, and no threat. Yet after everything they had already discovered beneath the old bridge, both understood that someone else still seemed to know exactly where this remarkable journey was leading. Less than 2 hours later, the mountains disappeared behind them as Victoria's black executive sedan carried them toward the glass headquarters of Hayes Industries. Nathan had insisted on bringing the canvas bag himself, treating the journal and the original charter with the same quiet care he used when carrying fragile furniture he had built by hand. He wore the same weathered flannel shirt, clean blue jeans, and worn leather boots. Victoria had offered to stop so he could buy a suit, but he had politely declined. Your grandfather did not ask for someone dressed differently, he said with a calm smile. He asked for me. Victoria understood immediately and never mentioned it again. The headquarters tower reflected the bright Montana morning like polished crystal. Employees hurried across the lobby, carrying laptops and coffee, barely noticing the quiet carpenter walking beside their chief executive. Several executives greeted Victoria respectfully before their eyes shifted toward Nathan with visible curiosity. He acknowledged every greeting with a simple nod and continued walking without appearing impressed by the luxurious surroundings. As they entered a private conference room beside the main boardroom, Victoria connected the storage drive to a large display screen to review the remaining recordings before the meeting began. One folder had not yet been opened. Its title read, "Only if Nathan is beside you." Victoria hesitated before clicking it. William Hayes appeared again, noticeably older than in the previous recording. His voice remained steady, but his smile carried deeper emotion. "Victoria, if Nathan Brooks is standing beside you now, then you have already discovered why I trusted him. There is one truth you still do not know." William slowly lifted an old photograph toward the camera. Nathan leaned closer, and his expression changed instantly. The photograph showed a much younger Nathan nearly 15 years earlier, wearing the same humble smile while kneeling beside an older man whose pickup truck had broken down along a lonely Montana highway after a severe snowstorm. Nathan remembered the day immediately. He had spent nearly 6 hours repairing the engine without accepting payment because the traveler had explained he needed to reach home before Christmas. The man had thanked him warmly, shaken his hand, and driven away. Nathan had never learned his name. William looked directly into the camera once more. "The gentleman in this photograph was my younger brother, Richard Hayes. He was also your father, Victoria." Victoria covered her mouth in complete astonishment. Nathan remained perfectly still as memories slowly returned. William continued. Richard told me that a stranger had refused a generous reward because he believed helping another person was simply the right thing to do. He spoke about that young carpenter for years. I became curious enough to quietly learn who Nathan Brooks was. From that day forward, I observed his life from a respectful distance, never interfering, only confirming that one act of kindness had not been an exception. It had been his character. Victoria felt tears quietly forming as she stared at Nathan. "You helped my father," she whispered. Nathan shook his head gently. "I only fix a truck." William smiled softly through the recording. "Nathan believes he repaired an engine. What he truly restored was my brother's faith that quiet goodness still existed in this world." That single afternoon changed Richard more than Nathan ever realized, and Richard's renewed hope later changed me. Never underestimate the reach of one selfless decision. The screen faded to black, leaving the room completely silent. Nathan lowered his eyes, almost uncomfortable receiving credit for something he had long forgotten. Victoria slowly reached into the canvas bag and lifted the original charter with both hands. "My grandfather was right," she said quietly. "The person who should stand beside me today is not the one with the most power. It is the one who has quietly protected hope all along." Moments later, the doors leading into the boardroom began to open, and beyond them waited a room filled with people who believed they were about to discuss the future of a company, never imagining they were about to witness the quiet truth that had been patiently waiting for them across 15 remarkable years. The boardroom overlooked the entire city through walls of glass that reflected the bright Montana sky. Yet the atmosphere inside felt heavier than the storm Nathan and Victoria had left behind only hours earlier. Around the long, polished table sat directors, attorneys, financial advisors, and senior executives, each surrounded by neatly organized reports forecasting greater profits through an ambitious restructuring plan. Conversations stopped the moment Victoria entered carrying the original charter, while Nathan followed quietly with the canvas bag resting over his shoulder. Curious eyes settled on the carpenter in the weathered flannel shirt, but Nathan paid little attention to the expensive suits or impressive titles surrounding him. He simply stood beside Victoria with the same calm presence he had carried into his cabin the night before. One board member broke the silence first. "Victoria, we are ready to vote." She gently placed the leather-bound charter in the center of the table instead. "Before anyone votes," she said evenly, "there is something every person in this room deserves to see." Several executives exchanged uncertain glances as she carefully unfolded the original document. The aged paper remained remarkably well preserved, each handwritten signature still clear after decades. The company attorney leaned forward immediately, adjusting his glasses as he examined the pages. His expression gradually shifted from professional curiosity to unmistakable surprise. "This appears to be the original signed charter," he said quietly. "We believed it had been lost many years ago." Victoria nodded. "It was never lost. It was protected." She then connected the storage drive to the large presentation screen. William Hayes appeared once more, his calm voice filling the room with unexpected warmth. Every conversation stopped. Every laptop closed. The room listened. William spoke not about quarterly earnings or market expansion, but about responsibility, dignity, and promises that outlived individual careers. He reminded future leaders that employees were never numbers on a spreadsheet, but families trusting the company with their futures. He explained that temporary profit gained by abandoning long-held principles would eventually cost far more than any financial statement could measure. When the recording ended, the silence remained. No one reached for their notes. No one interrupted. The company attorney slowly opened the original charter again and carefully compared several passages with archived digital copies already displayed on his tablet. After several long minutes, he looked toward the board. "These provisions are legally binding under the original governance structure," he announced calmly. "Any restructuring that violates these founding commitments would directly conflict with the company's governing charter." The room remained completely still. The proposal that had dominated months of preparation quietly collapsed beneath the weight of forgotten promises, finally restored to daylight. One senior director looked toward Nathan with genuine curiosity. "Sir, would you like to say something?" Nathan glanced around the room before resting his eyes on the portrait of William Hayes hanging above the fireplace at the far end of the boardroom. A gentle smile crossed his face. "I do not believe you need another speech," he answered softly. "Your founder already spoke for everyone." His simple words settled over the room with remarkable peace. There was no celebration, no applause, only thoughtful silence as each person reflected on what had just been placed before them. Victoria slowly looked around the table. For the first time since becoming chief executive officer, she no longer felt alone. The board chairman quietly cleared his throat before setting aside the restructuring proposal. "I recommend we withdraw today's vote and begin reviewing every policy against the principles established in the original charter." One by one, heads nodded in agreement. Not because they had been defeated, but because they had been reminded of something greater than personal ambition. As the meeting finally concluded, the morning sunlight reached the portrait of William Hayes, illuminating the quiet smile captured decades earlier. Nathan noticed it only for a brief moment before turning toward the exit. He had come expecting nothing, asked for nothing, and claimed nothing. Yet by simply remaining true to the values he had practiced all his life, he had helped restore not only a company's direction, but also the quiet promise upon which it had first been built. 1 year later, the mountains of western Montana welcomed another gentle spring, and Nathan Brooks began his morning exactly as he always had. The sunrise painted soft golden light across the valley, while birds filled the crisp air with familiar songs. The old pickup truck still rested beside the log cabin. The porch still held the same rocking chair he had repaired countless times. Emma, now 9 years old, laughed as she watered a small vegetable garden they had planted together after the last snowfall melted. Their life looked almost unchanged to anyone passing by. Nathan still repaired barns, fences, and cabins for families throughout the county. He still charged only what people could reasonably afford. He still believed that the strongest foundations were built with honest hands and patient hearts. The only noticeable difference was that more people now seemed to greet him with quiet respect, although very few knew the remarkable story that had unfolded beyond those mountains. Hayes Industries had changed as well. Under Victoria Hayes's leadership, the company restored programs that supported employees during difficult times, expanded apprenticeship opportunities for young workers, and renewed the community partnerships her grandfather had described so passionately in his journal. Quarterly reports remained healthy, but Victoria often reminded her leadership team that the most important numbers could never fully measure trust, dignity, or hope. Those values had quietly become the company's greatest strength. Late one peaceful afternoon, a familiar black sedan slowly made its way up the gravel driveway toward Nathan's cabin. Emma recognized it immediately and smiled before running toward the porch. Victoria stepped out carrying a small wooden box wrapped in dark blue cloth. She looked different now. Although still every bit the confident chief executive officer, there was a calmness in her expression that had not been there on the stormy night she first knocked on Nathan's door. Nathan welcomed her with the same warm smile and invited her inside without ceremony, just as he had 1 year earlier. After sharing coffee around the old kitchen table, Victoria carefully placed the wooden box before Nathan. "There was one final instruction from my grandfather," she said softly. "He asked me to deliver this exactly 1 year after the bridge." Nathan slowly lifted the lid. Inside rested William Hayes's old silver pocket watch, its surface gently polished by decades of careful use. Beneath it lay one final sealed envelope addressed simply to Nathan Brooks. He opened it with quiet hands and read silently. After a few moments, he handed the letter to Victoria. She smiled through grateful eyes because she already knew every word written there. William's final message thanked Nathan not for saving a company, but for reminding an entire family that lasting success always begins with ordinary kindness repeated over many years. He wrote that every generation searches for extraordinary heroes while often overlooking faithful neighbors whose quiet choices shaped the future one life at a time. Nathan gently closed the letter and placed the pocket watch back inside the box. "Your grandfather gave me more credit than I deserve," he said. Victoria shook her head with a peaceful smile. "No, he simply noticed what everyone else was too busy to see." Emma looked from one adult to the other before asking the question only a child would think to ask. "So what was the real treasure under the bridge?" Nathan looked toward the window, where sunlight rested across the pine trees before answering gently. "It was never hidden inside the box. It was hidden inside the choices people make every day." The room became wonderfully quiet. Outside, a light breeze carried the scent of fresh pine through the open window, just as another ordinary day settled over the mountains. Nathan remained the same humble father who had opened his door to a stranger during a storm without asking for anything in return. Victoria returned to the city carrying renewed purpose instead of greater ambition. And somewhere beyond the passing seasons, the legacy of William Hayes continued exactly as he had hoped, proving that dignity does not need to announce itself. Grace never asks for applause, and the quiet goodness of one faithful heart can echo farther than anyone will ever know.